A call for Rishi Sunak to go from one of his own MPs. He'll face the Commons at Prime Minister's questions in 45 minutes' time. This is Politics Live. Joining me in the studio, Conservative MP Chris Clarkson, Labour peer Ruth Anderson, Reem Ibrahim of the free market think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs, and we'll be joined shortly by Guardian columnist George Monbiot. Today.
Mr Gove, is Sunak the right person to lead the party into an election?
After a former cabinet minister calls for Rishi Sunak to go, allies jump to the Prime Minister's defence.
This is not the overwhelming view of the parliamentary party or the wider party. Rishi Sunak is a man with a plan.
But Clark, a serial critic of the Prime Minister, says the party faces a massacre with Sunak as Prime Minister. The leadership threat comes as Rishi Sunak prepares to face Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's questions at noon. We'll bring you that live.
We've actually grown faster than our European neighbours like Germany, for example. But of course we want to see more growth.
We've set out now how we want to grow the economy, the fastest sustained growth in the G7.
They both say they want economic growth, but can they achieve it? And is it even desirable?
They're falling all over themselves, saying this race is over. This race is far from over.
Who the hell was the imposter? She did very poorly, actually.
After victory for Donald Trump in New Hampshire, is the race to choose who will face President Biden in November over? Well, a former cabinet minister has gone all out in this morning's Telegraph. The former cabinet minister Simon Clarke doesn't hold back with his apocalyptic warnings of electoral wipeout for the Tories under Rishi Sunak. Let's have a look at the piece that he's written in the Telegraph. The headline, "Replace Sunak or face decade of decline under Starmer." He goes on to say in the piece, the unvarnished truth is that Rishi Sunak is leading the Conservatives into an election where we will be massacred. He does not get what Britain needs, and he isn't listening to what the British people want. I know many MPs are afraid another change of leader would look ridiculous, but what could be more ridiculous than meekly sleepwalking towards an avoidable annihilation because we weren't willing to listen to what the public are telling us so clearly? Well, that is all very clear from Simon Clarke. Let's talk to the BBC's deputy political editor, Vicki Young, for the latest. Vicki, is he a lone voice, Simon Clarke, or is this the beginning of something more widespread?
Well, look, in terms of publicly calling for the Prime Minister to be ousted, he is so far almost a lone voice. Dame Andrea Jenkins before Christmas did also call for him to be ousted. But, you know, I think you can hear there in those words from Sir Simon Clarke, he sounds angry, he sounds frustrated, and the polls at the moment do suggest that the Tories are likely to lose the next election. So there is an awful lot of frustration amongst Tory MPs, and it sounds like Sir Simon Clarke just thought, we can't just sit here and take this, we've got to do something about it, whatever that is. And his solution, he thinks, is a new leader, although he doesn't say who that person is. He suggests it's someone who would cut taxes, who would be tough on crime and immigration, all things, of course, that Rishi Sunak would say that he's doing. So far, he hasn't been joined by anybody else, and certainly as far as publicly calling for Rishi Sunak to go, well, that just hasn't happened. This feels a little bit like, you may remember, Joe, a long time ago, Jeff Hoon and Patricia Hewitt. Oh, yeah. They moved against Gordon Brown. No one followed them. Right.
All right, well, we'll talk about a wider plot in just a moment, but there has been some pushback, unsurprisingly, from other Conservative MPs. Vicki, just before I come to you again, we're just going to show a couple of them, give people a flavour. Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary, has tweeted, "At this critical time for our country with challenges at home and abroad, our party must focus on the people we serve and deliver for the country. Engaging in facile and divisive self-indulgence only serves our opponents. It's time to unite and get on with the job." And David Davis, former leadership contender and Brexit minister, says this is getting silly. The party and the country are sick and tired of MPs putting their own leadership ambitions ahead of the UK's best interests. They also sound quite angry, Vicki.
Yeah, and I think they feel, don't they, that a lot of people watching this will think what, another, you're going to change the leader again? You know, maybe that isn't the problem. Maybe there is a more deep-rooted problem for the Conservatives, and I think a lot of Tory MPs do know that as well. I mean, interestingly, Lee Anderson, of course, who you'll know lost his job effectively over the Rwanda bill, he has said no chance of Mr Sunak being deposed before the next election. So he doesn't think it's going to happen. Sources close to Liz Truss say they have no idea. She has no idea what Simon Clarke is up to and in no way supports what he's doing. Sources close to Robert Jenrick, Suella Braverman, all people who you think, well, they've been very critical of the Prime Minister. Are they likely to come out publicly? It doesn't sound like they are. So, you know, what is this about? I think it's potentially a little bit about what happens after the election. If all these Tory MPs do think that the party's going to lose, there will, of course, be a leadership election. Is this about putting down blame? Is it about suggesting which way the party should go post-election? But it's certainly at the moment, if you think about it, we've had 2 oustings of prime ministers recently, and it just doesn't feel like that. Without cabinet-level ministers really turning against the leader, it's difficult to see where this would go. Even if those 53 letters were put in, Rishi Sunak, it looks like he would win a confidence vote.
I mean, he's undeterred, Simon Clarke, I have to say, because he has subsequently tweeted in response to the pushback that we have just outlined, and he's said every Conservative MP will need to live with the decision they make in the coming days for the rest of their lives. Failing to act would itself represent a decision. Look at the polls. Personal insults don't change the facts. I have no further comment to make, famous last words. But Vicki, at the moment, no one else is coming out to call for a leadership contest. But is there any sense of a wider plot more generally? I mean, we did have that poll in the Telegraph last week. David Frost, former Brexit minister, associated with that. There does seem to be a sort of choreography, if you like.
I mean, possibly, but at the moment it doesn't look like a very good one. I think that's the truth of it. I mean, look, it might change. I'm not saying it won't change, but at the moment it just is not there. And I think partly who is this new leader that's going to turn up and do all these things and be able to turn around the fortunes of the Tory party and also get the support of, you know, a broad range of Conservative MPs. You've got to remember that we do hear, don't we, from, you know, a certain group of Tory MPs publicly. There's an awful lot of them who don't feel this at all. Now, we don't often necessarily hear them on air, but, you know, I think a lot of them just think this will not help, that it will make the party look ridiculous to try and change its leader again. And as I say, without a very obvious person to do it, you know, I think they would need to know who that person is before, you know, those moves happen.
Vicki Young, thank you very much. Well, we have a Conservative MP very helpfully here in the studio. Welcome to you, Chris. Let me just remind you of what Simon Clarke said. The unvarnished truth is that Rishi Sunak is leading the Conservatives into an election where we will be massacred. He doesn't get what Britain needs and he's not listening to what the British people want. What do you say?
Well, I'm surprised and disappointed. Simon's a good pal. He's a good guy. I'm not entirely sure what he's up to with this. It's certainly not the mood of the party in general. He's not read the room. I mean, our MP's WhatsApp group last night was pretty spicy, to put it politely. When you've got people like Priti Patel and David Davis, who are not known to be sort of paid up sort of Sunak supporters, coming out and saying this is utterly ridiculous, don't do it, that tells you quite a lot. I mean, fundamentally, you know, I'm not sure what Simon's at, but if you're going to try and stab Caesar in the back, don't hold a plastic spoon. Right.
Well, I mean, when you say it was pretty spicy on the WhatsApp, I mean, he's pretty spicy in his piece. Yeah, what sort of... Give us a flavour of what's being said.
Well, there was a fairly strong pushback. It's pretty much what you've been seeing on Twitter. I mean, people are saying, look, this is absolutely ridiculous. What you're trying to do is sort of empower Keir Starmer to get into number 10, which would be a disaster for the country. It's the one thing in his article I actually agree with. I mean, this is a man who's pretty much directionless. He works off a script, as we'll see in a few minutes' time.
But he is about 20 to 27 points ahead. I mean, in that, Simon Clarke is right.
In 2017,
well,
but 2 points ahead.
Yeah, but he's been consistently, the Labour Party's been consistently around 20 points ahead for quite a long time. I mean, Simon is right about that, isn't he, Simon Clarke? I mean, the polls are terrible.
At the moment they are, but they won't be come the election. Look, it's inexcusably arrogant to assume that we know what the outcome of the next election is going to be. We will be fighting for every single vote. We will have a prospectus to put to the country that will demonstrate that we're actually serious about getting these things done that we need to do. But this idea that somehow you can sort of look into the crystal ball and work out how many MPs are going to be for one party or another at this point is completely for the birds. Things change very, very quickly.
Well, they'll have to, won't they, for the Conservatives to have a chance at the next election, whenever it'll be. Ruth, would you rather Rishi Sunak stayed or went?
Oh, I door knock every weekend. I think Rishi can stay for as long as he'd like to stay. But the only thing I would agree with Chris about is that no one's won an election yet and no one's cast a vote. And absolutely everything can change very quickly. But we saw how quickly things can change when Liz Truss was Prime Minister and how much damage can be done very quickly. And I think I speak for many people when we've had enough of this Tory drama, and what we'd like is now just a general election and let the people decide what happens next, because this is just exhausting for everyone that has to live through the next chapter of your in-house drama. I'm really sorry, but let's just give it to the people to decide and give us an election.
Are you sure you want an election that quickly? I mean, Simon Clarke is also right in saying that Keir Starmer hasn't sealed the deal, to use that slightly hackneyed phrase, with the voters because of the large number of don't knows. Maybe you also need a bit of time.
I think we're ready for an election. I think Keir Starmer actually is highly regarded, and this is about who's going to be competent and take out some of the heat from our politics and just have some normal competence and back to day-to-day normal politics, which we have not had for the last 10 years.
No, I mean, Rishi Sunak, I mean, do you think he should stay or go in terms of improving the fortunes of the Conservative Party?
Well, look, I think we should maybe take party politics out of it for a moment. The bulk of what Simon Clarke is actually saying in this Telegraph piece is effectively that the direction of the party, the ideological direction, seems to have slightly shifted. He talks about the fact that the government have failed on housing reform, the government have failed to cut taxes, and actually, when it comes to those supply side reforms that actually the country need in order to really grow the economy and see sort of the next few years see that kind of economic success. I think actually what's interesting is that Simon, I think, has actually assessed the country's problems quite well.
Well, do you agree with that? I mean, it's true, isn't it?
So, look, I mean, Reem and I are actually singing from the same hymn sheet in terms of supply-side reform, housing reform.
And he hasn't done it.
So I think the problem we've got is the fallout from the Truss administration. I always use the risotto analogy to describe the Trussnomics. So a risotto, the important part of it is the recipe. It's a lot of time spending, stirring, sort of making sure all the ingredients are in the right place, doing things in sequence.
You've thought about this, haven't you,
I
Chris?
certainly have. Look, Liz got all the right ingredients, all the things we agreed on. She popped them all in the pot at the same time, whacked the heat up full and expected the same result.
Right.
Now, the Prime Minister is a man who knows how to make a risotto, and he knows it's going to take a bit of time.
Yeah, but it hasn't had housing reform. I mean, Reem is
still at the stirring stage. The stock is going in.
We're 14 years in.
That stirring has been going on for a very long time, George. Perhaps we'll leave the analogy and let's put the spice to one side. But, I mean, more infighting probably hastens the arrival, potentially, of a general election, which you would be a fan of.
Oh, gosh, I hope so, because the longer we wait, the longer the Tories have to salt the earth and poison the wells, which is basically what they're doing in this country, or rather poisoning the rivers, to be a bit more precise. But I love, these two extraordinary ideas in Simon's article. One, that there's some unnamed prince over the water, some Prester John who will rise in the east and come with his hordes to rescue the Conservative Party. Who is this man?
Well, who is it? Does anyone have an idea?
We don't need somebody else. There's already the right man in the right
job. But secondly, the idea that Sunak's failing because he's not right-wing enough, because he's not being cruel and beastly enough to those horrible Liberals. Here is a man who's currently steering through Parliament a criminal justice bill which will criminalise rough sleeping, which will say that people sleeping on the streets will either be imprisoned or will have to pay a fine of £2,500, which, of course, they have in their back pocket. This is a government of extreme cruelty, a government of sadism, a government which has pushed hard-right politics further than the population will accept.
I hear what you're saying. Chris, do you want to respond?
It's like having an out-of-body experience. I don't know what parallel universe George has come in from, but it's not the one that I'm in. Look, fundamentally...
You think he's not right-wing enough?
I think he's the right amount of right wing. Look, fundamentally, you win elections from the centre, and I'm dripping wet. I'm in the One Nation wing of the party. I'm very happy with this Prime Minister. I'd like him to, like a lot of people, I'd like to see a bit more of that sort of tax reform. I'd like to see more money going in people's pockets, but we're doing that. And as I've said before, this is not a quick process. You can't just flip a switch and all of a sudden you've got supply-side reform. Reem, you must agree with me on this. This is about patience. It's about undoing.
Lobbyist.
Okay. I'm going to ignore
She can
that.
speak for herself. Let her answer.
Look, what I will say is ultimately, with regard to the way in which the government have handled the economy over the last few years, it's sort of gone into economic decline, economic mismanagement. I I think it's very nice to sort of say, well, actually, before the election, we're going to implement all of these supply-side reforms. I think it's just too little too late. We need to have seen those kind of tax cuts and actually those supply-side reforms initially, because ultimately I think that people should be allowed to keep more of their own money in their own pocket.
Right, well, let's talk about growth since we've moved on to that subject. This headline in the Daily Mail: Cabinet Minister Kemi Badenoch scraps more than 2,000 EU laws and promises there will be more to come before the next election. Now, it is true, a certain number of laws have been scrapped, but there are many, many more still to come. Let's have a listen.
We've actually grown faster than our European neighbours like Germany, for example, but of course we want to see more growth.
We've set out now how we want to grow the economy, the fastest sustained growth in the G7.
But what we have a lot of control over is the long-term growth prospects of the economy, and that is our focus.
We are ambitious for the future. If we can grow our economy, if we can reform our public services, I'm confident we can make those investments.
So everybody wants growth. How do you get it, Chris?
So we've got to stick to the plan. Fundamentally, the Prime Minister has charted a course here, and we are going back into serious growth. I mean, we've actually got growth at the moment. It's not anywhere as big as we'd like it to be. We've completely
barely got any growth.
But let's put aside the fact that it's not as big as we want it. The fact is that people were predicting the biggest recession for 100 years, not a few months to go.
Chris, we've been bumping along the bottom. We've only just missed recession. Let's be honest.
Yes, and we're also recovering from the fact that there's a massive spike in energy prices occasioned by the war in Ukraine, and we've had a pandemic, and we had to do some pretty unconservative things in order to do the right thing, and now we're having to sort of reap the rewards of doing those things. Now, don't get me wrong, I have absolutely no regrets about voting for things like paying 80% of people's wages, but there is an economic cost to that, and realistically, you can't just sort of, as I said, flip a switch and go straight back to sort of impressive levels of growth.
Well, if you can't flip a switch,
reforms.
why does Labour think that the growth fairy is suddenly going to appear if you win the next election?
I think we've been hearing quite a lot, actually, about how supply-side reform, how we haven't got the right planning environment, how we haven't got fiscal lock. We heard yesterday from the head of the OBR who couldn't get statistics out of the government, who couldn't get any planning commitments. So everything has been chaos. And I think, first of all, we need some stability. We need Rachel Reeves.
But stability won't bring growth.
No, it does. But then we need to unlock private sector investment. We are currently the worst level in the G7 for private sector investment. Planning regulations need to change. We need our Green Prosperity Fund.
And how long will that all take?
Look, some of those things happen immediately. They'll happen within our first 100 days. The fiscal lock will happen within our first 100 days if we're lucky enough and privileged enough to win a general election. And some of that will take longer. But what we can say is that we will be investing in people when we will get to our Green Prosperity Fund. We'll be investing...
Now, when will you get to that Green Prosperity Fund? Because an awful lot of the industrial strategy that is being proposed by Labour rests on this £28 billion a year of investment, which has been debated, watered down. Without it, you won't get growth, will you?
We are having our Green Prosperity Fund. We'll get to 28 billion within our first Parliament, within the first half of our first Parliament. Well, we'll have to see what you have finally left us with when you leave office, because honestly, every day it changes. Well, I'm not sure it will be. Let's be very clear about what you've done. Hold on a second, you have talked over me, so hold on a second. We've got the highest level of debt. We've got this is going to be the first Parliament in modern history where people's take-home salaries, where people's lived experience is worse during a Parliament. And while you talked about the things you're proud to have voted on and anaemic growth, that is not what's happened in America. That's not what's happened in some of our partner allies, If you look about inflation rates around the world, if you look about investment and you look about growth, we are an outlier for some of our allies. This is not how life has to be.
Well, while you fight over a note about whether there is any money left, are you impressed by what you hear in terms of Labour's plans? I mean, is growth desirable?
So Simon Kuznets, who was the guy who developed the concept of GDP, he said GDP should not be confused with the welfare of the nation. It should not be used as a measure of that welfare. So, for instance, we recently had some major floods which forced people to have to refurbish their homes. All that is measured as part of GDP. That's considered to be something good and something that we're trying to encourage. GDP captures everything that happens, good or bad. We need a different measure. We need a measure of actual human well-being, which is independent from GDP, because this pursuit of growth, and I see both parties are totally united on this, this is what's driving Earth systems towards the brink. This is what's trashing our climate, trashing our soils, trashing our ecosystems, trashing our life support systems. We've got to unhook ourselves from the blind pursuit of growth at all costs.
Absolutely not true. And I think that, when we're talking about growth, what we really do mean is that people, individuals that work incredibly hard, get to keep more of their own money. And I actually think what's interesting, and I would be interested in how you would like to measure general well-being, because ultimately I think we all want the world to be a better place. We all want the country to be a better place to live in. But ultimately I think that is done not through more government, but less. And I actually do think that by allowing businesses and allowing those individuals to trade with one another, that's how we can achieve that kind of growth. And I don't think that growth is a bad thing. I think growth is a very positive thing. It's very politically charged. Both parties seem to think that they have an idea of how to get there. But ultimately, if we're actively implementing policies that are not going to be supporting the way in which the economy is growing, we've got to stop talking about growth in that way.
Well, of course you want to rip down regulations. Of course you don't care about the natural world. Because you're from the Institute of Economic Affairs, which is funded by oligarchs and corporations. Yes, and I should be. And actually the BBC should be as well, because the BBC says that the funding and affiliations of the organisations which come onto its programmes should be revealed. But the IEA pointedly and continually refuses to reveal who funds it. When we find out who funds you, we discover it's oil companies, it's tobacco companies, it's the most ruthless and rapacious companies on earth, and you are their spokesperson.
This is some kind of wild conspiracy that he's incredibly obsessed with. And look, I appreciate that this is the kind of thing that you're obsessed with individually. I would like to actually talk about the policy matters at hand, because I actually would like to talk about the way in which people in this country are suffering.
And on whose behalf are you talking?
Myself, I'm talking about myself.
And you just happen to be employed by the Institute of Economic Affairs,
absolutely. Look,
which happens to be funded by oligarchs.
Well, George, don't dispute her motives. That's what her motives are.
Let's talk about effectively what George is saying is he thinks that I'm being funded by dark lobbyists because he doesn't think that I believe the things that I'm saying, which I think is incredibly offensive for you to sit here and tell me that I don't believe the things that I'm saying. I come from countries that have been decimated by socialism. I believe in individual liberty. I believe in free markets, and I believe in people having the power to spend their own money without governments taking it from them. So I'm incredibly offended by this insinuation.
And like the other dark money think tank staff,
all right, listen, George, just two things. So hang on, two things, George. We have also interrogated this at length on a programme some time ago, and both you and Reem are here to present your distinct views. It's not objective, it's presenting your distinct views. Let's go back to the issue of growth and why you don't think it's desirable, when the rest of the panel would probably argue that growth has been what has brought us, to some extent, prosperity, public services that we rely on. Why do you think that is intrinsically wrong?
Because it is economic growth which is the great driver of environmental destruction. And there's loads of work showing this. There's been a total failure to detach environmental destruction from growth. We've seen a relative reduction.
But what about the £28 billion that Labour is suggesting is invested in order to promote the sort of climate change policies that you would support?
Well, by all means, but let's do that instead of some of the other forces, like building new roads.
But that would be growth.
Well, we can spend that money into the economy, and that could stimulate growth. But if at the same time we're removing spending from, say, road building, which also stimulates growth, then we get a double whammy.
Well,
we get
Chris,
something better without necessarily raising GDP, which can be harmful.
Chris?
I think first things first. I mean, look, the Institute of Economic Affairs is a think tank. It puts out ideas. The idea that somehow, they have this massive influence is for the birds, and there are left-wing think tanks and there are right-wing think tanks. And fundamentally, I agree with quite a lot of what Reem said, but, I mean, the idea that's somehow changed my mind is utterly bonkers. This idea that we should somehow all go and live in sort of wooden shacks somewhere and pretend that electricity doesn't exist anymore is utterly bonkers. One of the biggest drivers of green technology has been the market. It's been the economic imperative to make these things work. My constituency is home to the second largest wind farm in Europe, and it's there because it generates a lot of electricity and a lot of money, and people like having it there. Well, not everybody, but most people like having it there.
Except, of course, I mean, George, you should hook on the fact we haven't had much growth. I mean, we literally haven't had much economic growth, and arguably there has been some progress in decarbonisation. So, in a way, we're in the state that you would sort of support.
Well, it's very interesting that when we have had growth over the past 10, 20 years, it has not helped the poor. It's been almost entirely captured by the
Absolutely
rich.
not true at all.
And we've seen a massive... No, I've got the figures. We see a massive disparity.
What figures are you talking about? George, I'm sorry, but this is ridiculous. The idea that somehow growth hurts the poorest in society is just not
I didn't
true.
say it hurt the poor. I said it's been almost entirely captured by the rich. If you look, for instance, at the work of Emmanuel Sayers and Thomas Piketty, you'll see this massive data-gathering exercise where they're shown...
So there's been no redistribution,
Exactly.
as you would say, to the poorest. I mean, what would you say to that? Because Labour were in power up until 2010.
I mean, it's been 14 years since we last had the opportunity to serve, but I'd say I live in a community where things like investment in our public services has a genuine impact on people's living standards. And the fact that we've seen the decimation of public services over the last few years has had a genuine impact on people's living. And we can't afford to pay for that unless we've got a level of economic growth.
But is Labour investing more? Is promising to invest a lot more in public services?
We're promising a whole host of things, including... and all of it is funded before you enjoy yourself. But but what I was going to say, because some of this is about how we do a just transition and how we actually make sure that people where I live in Stoke-on-Trent actually have these experiences. So we are known for our pottery. It's wonderful pottery. It's a shame that we've now got plastic.
Recyclable.
But still, it's not pottery from Stoke-on-Trent.
No, it's not.
That's an energy-intensive industry. Then that is a core part of our identity. We need to be able to transition to new energy sources, including hydrogen, and find a way of making kilns work with a new energy-intensive industry. We're going to need money to do the R&D and an industrial strategy to get to that point. And we need money to do that. We need to open the chequebook in order to help. And that's how the Green Prosperity Fund is going to assist.
I think the problem is there is huge amounts of money slopping around in this country, but it is mostly in the hands of the very rich. We could be taxing them more. We don't have to tax the people at the bottom anymore. In fact, we could cut some of those taxes. We could fund these programmes. But at the same time, we don't have to do so in ways that drive the destruction of Earth systems. And I'm all in favour of the green transition. But let's look at the wider picture of this pursuit of growth for the sake of growth.
It's not growth for the sake of growth. It's growth for being able to afford the things that we want to do in our country,
but
including
there is enough
the NHS,
money to afford it. I mean, we're massively richer than we were generations ago when they could do more.
As a result
this
of
is a
business
political
and
choice.
growth. And I also think that, when we're talking about growth as this, it's a very politically charged word. Growth helps and benefits everyone in the economy, everybody in society, especially those at the poorest in society. Let's be honest, when there is a recession, those at the very top of the socio-economic scale aren't really affected by that substantially. It really is the people at the bottom that are affected by recession. And so what we want to see is an economy that is growing, that is prosperous, an economy in which starting a business is really easy to do. And I actually think part of that is not just cutting taxes, but also simplifying the tax system.
All right, we're going to leave it there and talk about the presidential race in America, specifically the Republican presidential nomination race. You may have been following the headlines. Here's BBC headline: New Hampshire primary. Nikki Haley vows to fight on after second loss to Donald Trump. She lost in the Iowa caucus too. Let's hear some of the clips from both Nikki Haley and Donald Trump last night.
They're falling all over themselves, saying this race is over. Well, I have news for all of them. New Hampshire is first in the nation. It is not the last in the nation.
We've won almost every single poll in the last 3 months against crooked Joe Biden. Almost every poll. And she doesn't win those polls. And she doesn't win those. This is not your typical victory speech, but let's not have somebody take a victory when she had a very bad night. She had a very bad night.
Well, Donald Trump and Nikki Haley there. Let's talk to Mark Lotter, who is Director of Strategic Communications for President Trump in 2020. He is now Chief Communications Officer at America First Policy Institute. Welcome to you, Mark. Do you think it's all over in terms of the Republican nomination race?
Yes, absolutely. There's no pathway forward for Nikki Haley. I mean, the next stop is Nevada, where she's not even competing. Then a month from now, we are in her home state of South Carolina. And according to the Real Clear Politics average, Donald Trump is beating her by about 30 points in her home state.
Right. But, Mark, what is strange, when you look at the polls, we'll show our viewers here, but I'll read it out to you. The CBS poll, Choice for President, Likely Voters. You can see Joe Biden there on 48% and Donald Trump on 50%, ahead, but not by very much at all. But you look at Joe Biden up against Nikki Haley, well, she's clearly ahead. Joe Biden on 45% and she's on 53%. Why aren't Republicans throwing their weight behind Nikki Haley for a more certain win against Joe Biden?
Well, it's clear that her message is not connecting or resonating with Republican voters. When you look at the results last night from New Hampshire, when it came to likely Republican voters, she only got 25% of those. The former president got 25. Nikki Haley's strength last night was with independent voters and many independent-leaning Democrats who came over to the Republican primary. Same thing holds true in Iowa. And so, her message across the long term is just showing that it's not resonating with that Republican conference voter.
No, but the question is, why not, if she's more likely to beat Joe Biden?
Well, I think a lot of people think that Donald Trump is very well positioned to beat Joe Biden. In fact, I was on the 2020 campaign, as you mentioned, and there was not a single time in the Real Clear Politics average of polls and most national polls at all during 2019 or 2020 where Donald Trump was beating Joe Biden in the popular vote in those polls. He's now winning in most all those polls. He's got a lead in the Real Clear Politics average, something he never had during 2020.
All right.
And so he's very well positioned heading up against President Biden.
All right. Well, let me read you some of the comments from our politicians here in the UK about Donald Trump. Alicia Cairns, who's a senior Conservative politician, chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, said it's 2024 and people are seriously calling for someone to be president of the USA who falsely claims the last election was stolen from them, will face charges for inciting insurrection, was found liable of sexually abusing a woman, obstructed investigations, abused his power to pardon his friends, and has indictments which amount to a total of 91 felony charges. Completely mind-blowing. And Sir Peter Westmacott, British ambassador to the US from 2012 to 2016, we know he's a monster. He writes, he's unprincipled. He's a misogynistic fraud and liar and destroyer of constitutions. The reality is he will be there. We have to find ways of engaging with the US if Trump is elected. Well, they're clearly not fans, as you can tell, Mark, from those comments. What's your reaction?
I mean, that's obviously, the view from across the pond. When you look at what the American voters are thinking, they're supporting Donald Trump, both in the Republican primary and the way things look right now. And first off, it's not true. He's never been charged with insurrection. In fact, there are laws against insurrection. Donald Trump doesn't face any of those, hasn't been charged with any of those, let alone convicted. So that's just fundamentally untrue, the one comment there. But we'll let this thing play out across the November election. It looks very good. And the one thing that Joe Biden didn't have in 2020 was a record. He has one now. The American people don't like it. When you go up and down every single major issue facing the American people, immigration, economy, inflation, crime, education, people disapprove of Joe Biden by massive amounts, double digits, 60, 70%. It's not a good place. Joe Biden's approval rating is lower than Jimmy Carter's right now.
All right.
And that just shows you what the American people think of Joe Biden.
Mark, stay with us because we have guests here in the studio, politicians and also commentators. George, what do you say? Have we misunderstood Donald Trump?
Unfortunately, I don't think we have. In fact, if anything, we haven't quite grasped the full gravity of what another Trump term would mean. I mean, this is a guy who's openly boasted about being an authoritarian. He said he'd be a dictator on day one. He said only on day one, but we all know how that goes. This is a guy who tried to overturn the results of the last election. This is a tremendously dangerous moment, not just for the US, but for everyone on earth.
Right. Do you think Joe Biden will win or Donald Trump in November? Let's presuming they get the nominations.
I mean, the momentum seems to be behind Trump.
Right. I mean, our former Prime Minister, Mark, although I'm going to put this question to the Conservative politician here, Boris Johnson, has backed Donald Trump, saying his return to the White House could be just what the world needs. Do you agree with him?
It's Boris's opinion. I have to say I'm not particularly inspired by either of the choices. I find it absolutely staggering in a country of 360 odd million people. This is the best that they could find. I mean, that is genuinely mind-bending. I mean, I have to say, my personal politics, I'd be a bit close to Nikki Haley. I mean, I don't agree with her on everything, but I have to say she would be my choice if I was voting in a Republican primary.
Right. I mean, the polls do show, Mark, that people aren't enamoured by the choice that is probably going to face them in the United States. Can you understand that? Exactly what Chris has said.
I can totally see where, and a lot of times people don't like the choice at hand. And in fact, most of the recent elections, people have just been, well, I don't like either of them. I dislike this one less than that one. And so that's kind of been a mantra we have had going back for a while now. I would say in the last, couple of decades, except maybe Barack Obama in there during his first run, most certainly. So that's kind of a built into our politics. But I think when you look at what's going on, when people look at their lives, going back to that old question that Ronald Reagan so famously asked, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Well, the answer is no.
Oh, OK. Is the Labour Party, if they win the election, ready for a Trump presidency, Ruth?
Well, we'll have to be if we win the election. And David Lammy has been reaching out to our Shadow Foreign Secretary has been reaching out to senior Republicans. He's got a really good relationship with Condoleezza Rice. He's speaking to Mike Pompeo. We are getting ready for whatever falls. We'll have to make it work. It is our closest ally and our defence and security. It's imperative that we find a way to have a relationship with him.
What are the implications in your mind, Reem, of Trump's return to the White House?
Well, I think what's particularly interesting from a foreign policy perspective is what this means amongst all of the chaos that we're seeing abroad. I mean, we've got still horrendous humanitarian crisis ongoing in Gaza. We've still seeing, we're collaborating with the US on airstrikes in Yemen in order to stamp out the Houthis. So again, there are huge numbers.
Do you think Donald Trump will make those situations better?
Well, no, I don't. And I suspect that he'll probably want to withdraw and become a little bit more isolationist in his foreign policy. But again, I mean, as Ruth said, whoever leads this country after the next general election will have to work with that special relationship.
Right. You mentioned, George, about being a dictator for a day. It sounds like one of those things you win at a school prize giving. And green policy is another dividing line, certainly between President Trump and the general public opinion here. So we're going to drill, baby, drill, Trump told Fox News last week. We have more liquid gold under our feet, energy, oil and gas, than any other country in the world. What do you think? How dangerous is this?
He's almost ideologically committed to planetary destruction. He wants to trash it. He sees anything which hasn't been felled or drilled or trashed as being almost an insult to his ego. So, yeah, very, very dangerous in that respect as well. He'll almost certainly try to pull the US out of the global climate talks as well. He'll trash any international environmental treaties. The trouble is he's much better prepared this time. He didn't expect to get in 2016. But now, thanks to the network of which, as it happens, the International Institute, the Institute of Economic Affairs is part.
You are obsessed, George.
He's got the Heritage Foundation, these other dark money junk tanks writing. I mean, they've produced this thing called a Mandate for Leadership, this massive, great document where they have made the policies for him.
All right. Well, let's get Mark's reaction, particularly when it comes to the destroying the planet and pulling the US out of all sorts of agreements and treaties. Mark.
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly I don't speak for the former president or his campaign, but he's been very clear. And I think that, that he would continue to pull us out of the Paris Climate Accords. I think they're disastrous. And really what they do is penalize the United States, our economy, while the world's leading polluters, China, India, and others, get off scot-free. And that's just not right. But I think it also underscores a very deep divide, maybe in the world, definitely in America, that protecting the environment and having strong energy, clean energy, and a good economy, that they're mutually exclusive. You can have one or the other. President Trump proved that you could do both. We rebuilt our American energy dominance. We became a global exporter of oil, and we cleaned our economy or our environment, removed more pollutants than at any time than ever before during those 4 years.
Right.
we can do it again because we do it cleaner and better.
Oh, well, George, would you like to respond?
Well, all this is simply untrue. I mean, the US actually has got off very lightly
the facts behind me,
in
dude.
international climate treaties. The obligations of the US are far lower than they ought to be were it to pull its weight. We saw Trump acting, well, as a massive vandal, effectively, during his first term, and it's very clear from this mandate for leadership document that it would be even worse if he wins a second term. This is a very, very dangerous moment for the protection of Earth systems.
Mark?
I mean, I completely disagree. The facts are on my side. We were actually cleaner with the environment and a strong economy and with being an energy dominant exporter all at the same time. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. The former president has been very clear. He wants clean air, clean land, clean water. We don't have to do it in spite of U.S. jobs. We can do it together. And that'll be the way we'll go forward, moving forward, should he be reelected.
Right.
I'd love to know where these magical policies are because I haven't seen them.
Right, I mean, you're not doing a great job, if you don't mind me saying, of convincing Mark and supporters of Donald Trump of your views when it comes to what they might do in terms of drill, baby, drill.
Well, as Jonathan Swift observed, you can't reason someone out of a position they didn't reason their way into.
Well, Mark Lotter, thank you very much for joining us today. We have Prime Minister's questions coming up in about 5 minutes' time. Rishi Sunak will be facing Keir Starmer across the dispatch box. Let's look at this headline in the Daily Telegraph. Public face call-up. If we go to war, military chief warns. General says army is too small and government needs to mobilise the nation in the event of conflict with Russia. We've talked a lot about defence and also, as we heard from David Cameron, the lights are flashing red on the dashboard. We've heard a lot from the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps about future conflicts. What do you make of that story, though, from the head of the army?
So I'd say it's an interesting take. I'm a Pat brat. I was born in an RAF base in Germany. I have an emotional attachment to the military, as you would imagine. I'm wearing a Royal College of Defence Studies tie, in fact. Look, I think we need to reason with the fact that actually the future of warfare will look very different. We have autonomous vehicles now. We have automated systems. The amount of personnel we're going to need, the amount of grey tonnage we're going to need is going to look very, very different for the types of wars we're going to fight. So whilst I appreciate there is a red light on the dashboard at the moment, are we necessarily sure that the inboard computer and the engine are talking to each other properly for what we need to do now?
Right. I mean, but is the British public ready for some sort of call-up, voluntary, at this stage? He's not calling for conscription.
Look, I think we have to be really clear about what's happened over the last 14 years. We've seen huge cuts to our armed forces. We've got the smallest army in our history, and we're struggling to recruit. And all of this goes back to systematic changes that this government has made. This is not what we left them with in 2010. So some of this is because of where we currently are. So now it depends on what we're going to go forward. I think we have to be really honest. And the news, anyone that's looking at the news and has for the last 2 years is going to be scared. Post-Ukraine, what's happening in Gaza, Yemen, we're living in really turbulent times, and we need to have a conversation with the general public about the impact of that. And
including
no,
that?
I don't think we'll get to that. What we need is a proper recruitment plan for our armed forces and actually invest in them so that we know what happened. I mean, this is absolutely ludicrous not what Sanders is saying, but the fact that we're even having to have this conversation. Our armed forces should be much better equipped right now than they are.
George, what do you think? I mean, when it comes to priorities, choices, Grant Shapps said the peace dividend is over. You know, the amount that we spend perhaps on public services, we've spent a lot more on that since the Cold War, and maybe now that needs to be reversed.
Well, look, this is a scary situation. You know, we're seeing horrendous things in the Middle East. We're seeing Putin's aggression continuing in Ukraine. But let's not let this be an opportunity for a military resource grab where they say, right, this is whoopee time because we can now spend even more on weapons than we do already. I mean, we've seen actually massive overspend. Well, when you look at the insane procurement decisions, like these aircraft carriers which don't really work, and so many ways in which money gets funneled into the military without the sort of questioning that applies when it gets funneled into any other public service. So I think I'm not saying, you know, let's stop spending, let's stop defending ourselves, but I am saying let's be a little bit sceptical about some of the demands that are being made.
I'm going to shock you. I actually agree with George here. I think that we can't just sort of be saying we're going to increase military spending without actually looking at where that money is going. And I actually think that, you know, I think Ruth's absolutely right. The key problem problem here is recruitment, that the military have failed to meet their recruitment targets over the last few years, which has now, of course, meant that there have been an effect on the size of the military, the amount of personnel, but also the way in which it's been able to operate. And we need a strong military in order to protect this country, but also for us to be able to protect others internationally.
Right. I mean, Chris, what do you make of it? Is this a land grab or an attempted sort of land grab for more resources?
Well, look, fundamentally, any government department, when asked if it needs more resources, will always
Sure.
say
yes.
I mean, for me, the optimal size of the state is small enough to put in a shoebox and bury in the back garden. The MOD will necessarily require funding. I think we need to have a conversation about procurement. I'm going to agree now with George as well. We need to have a conversation, but I don't think there's a huge amount of deviation, because I've talked to Labour colleagues who are interested in defence as well, and we all agree that military procurement has become bloated and difficult and inefficient, because half the time you're trying to plan 5 and 10 years into the future about what you'll need and what conflicts you may be encountering. That's very, very hard to do.
Right. We've got Rishi Sunak coming to the dispatch box in just a moment's time, and we'll go into the chamber. How hard is it going to be for him after Simon Clarke's intervention?
I think he'll be fine. Look, Keir works off a script. As soon as he goes off script, he all goes to pot for him. So, look, the Prime Minister is
he's just walked in. We'll see how comfortable he is. Ruth, what do you say?
I think, yet again, Rishi's in for a difficult PMQs. But let's be clear, Keir Starmer is a barrister. Was a barrister. He can happily work off script. And he's also an incredibly intelligent man. So I think this is nonsense. But yet again, what we're going to see is either forced cheers for Rishi.
Well, we've had a cheer, whether they were forced or not, I don't know. I think just as he walked in.
Sorry, did you just call me love?
I'm very sorry, I'm Northern.
I was born in Edinburgh. That's still unacceptable.
Oh, I'm very sorry.
We'll go into the chamber in just a moment. Sir Lindsay Hoyle is just reading out a statement beforehand. But let's go inside the chamber for Prime Minister's questions.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I know that members from across the House will want to join me in offering our best wishes to His Majesty the King and Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, this afternoon I shall be meeting the extraordinary 100-year-old Holocaust survivor, Lily Ebbett. Lily promised that if she survived Auschwitz, she would tell the world the truth of what happened. Never has such a promise been so profoundly fulfilled. And as we prepare to mark Holocaust Memorial Day on Saturday, I'm sure the whole House will join me in reaffirming our promise to Lily that we will never forget the Holocaust and we will carry forward her life's work for generations to come.
Richard Johnson. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I echo the Prime Minister's comments on World Holocaust Day? My constituents, like all of our constituents, rely on the Royal Mail to deliver important items of mail and packages and for people to run their businesses. So they'll be very alarmed to learn of proposals from Ofcom that Royal Mail might be allowed to cut the number of days that they might be able to, that they will provide that service. Can the Prime Minister give a commitment to me here today that under his watch there will be no reduction in postal services provided by the Royal Mail in Scotland or anywhere else?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree about the importance of the Royal Mail's universal service obligation, and as you will have heard from the Minister this morning, we remain absolutely committed to ensuring that it remains as it is.
Paul Holmes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Lib Dem-run council in Eastleigh has just received a report from their external auditors warning of the possibility of fraud and ignoring whistleblowers who try to warn them. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that Lib Dem leaders who shun accountability, shun transparency and simply say "not me, Gov" should start showing some remorse and responsibility or make way for those who will?
Well,
We'll need the answer. Come on,
my honourable friend raises an important matter to the people of Eastleigh, which I was pleased to discuss with him on my recent visit to his area, and I know that the contents of the report are deeply concerning. It is disappointing to see this Liberal Democrat-run council rack up debt with absolutely no plan for how to fund it. And the council has been issued with a best value notice, and I know that he is talking to the Department of Levelling Up, who will be monitoring the situation closely.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about His Majesty the King and Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales, and in his comments about Holocaust Memorial Day? Never again must be said more defiantly this year, as it's said every year. Mr. Speaker, last week we lost Sir Tony Lloyd, a true public servant who touched the lives of many people across the House and across the country. And I'm glad that his family were here yesterday to hear the many tributes to and memories of Tony. He will be greatly missed. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's had quite a week, from endlessly fighting with his own MPs to collapsing in laughter when he was asked by a member of the public about NHS waiting lists. So I was glad to hear that he managed to take some time off.
Can I just say, I wanted to the Prime Minister, I'm certainly going to hear the Leader of the Opposition. Those people who don't want to hear, they can certainly leave, because that's who it's going to be, so get it in order. Some of you are wanting to catch my eye again. It's not a good way to do it.
Mr. Speaker, I love this quaint tradition where the more they slag him off behind his back, the louder they cheer in here. Keep it going.
And also, for this side, you can have a joint cup of tea. Come on,
Mr. Speaker, I was glad to see that he managed to get some time off yesterday afternoon to kick back, relax, and accidentally record a candid video for Nigel Farage. The only thing missing from that punishing schedule is any sort of governing or leadership. So was he surprised to see one of his own MPs say that he doesn't get what Britain needs and he's not listening to what people want?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about what Britain needs, what Britain wants, what Britain values. This from a man who takes the knee, Mr. Speaker, who wanted to abolish the monarchy, who still doesn't know what a woman is, and who just this week, one of his front benchers said that they back teaching divisive white privilege in our schools, Mr. Speaker. Looking at his record, it's crystal clear which one of us doesn't get Britain's values.
Mr. Speaker, he spouts so much nonsense, no wonder they're giving up on him. And even now, as his government crumbles around him and his own MPs point out he's out of touch, got no plan for growth, crime or building houses, the Prime Minister is sticking to his one-man Pollyanna show. Everything's fine. People should be grateful to him. The trouble is, no one's buying it. Does he actually understand why his own MPs say he doesn't understand Britain and that he is an obstacle to recovery?
Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, he calls it nonsense, but these are his positions, Mr. Speaker. Right? And he doesn't want to talk about it, but this is the fact. He chose to represent a now proscribed terrorist group, Mr. Speaker. He chose to campaign against the deportation of foreign national offenders, Mr. Speaker, just like he chose to serve the Right Honourable Member for Islington North, Mr. Speaker. That's his record, those are his values, and that is exactly how he should be judged.
Mr. Speaker, in 2008, I was the Director of Public Prosecution, putting terrorists and murderers in jail. He was making millions betting on the misery of working people during the financial crisis. And we've seen this story time and time again with this lot. Party first, country second, safely ensconced in Westminster, they get down to the real business of fighting each other to death. The country forced to endure their division and chaos, the longest episode of EastEnders ever put to film. Meanwhile, this week we discover that Britain is going to be the only major economy that no longer makes its own steel. That the government is handing out £500 million to make 3,000 steelworkers redundant. And that the parents of thousands are being told that his free childcare promise is nothing but a mirage. Isn't he embarrassed that the Tory party is yet again entirely focused on itself?
Mr. Speaker, yet more sniping from the sidelines. Yeah, you can see. Yeah. You can see exactly why Hizb ut-Tahrir hired him in the first place. But he wants to talk about these things. Even his own party are now realising that he simply doesn't have a plan for this country, Mr. Speaker. The member for Dagenham and Raynham said it's difficult to identify the purpose of his leadership. And long-time celebrity backer Steve Coogan recently said he licks his finger, sticks it in the air, and just sees which way the wind is blowing. Even Labour Party know, Mr. Speaker, he's not a leader, he is a human weather vane.
It's not the sidelines, it's behind him that the fire's coming in, Mr. Speaker. And he can try and blame the Labour Party all he wants. The difference is, I've changed my party, he's bullied by his party. And has he found the time in his busy schedule to work out why thousands of parents are being told by their nurseries that they won't get free childcare that he promised them?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's see what his party is offering the country. Right, so we all know, Mr. Speaker, he doesn't have many ideas for our country.
I'm going to hear the Prime Minister.
Well, he doesn't have many, but one thing we do know, Mr. Speaker, is that...
You don't want to push it, do you? No.
We do know that he's committed to his 2030 decarbonisation promise, Mr. Speaker, which they say will cost £28 billion. But I was reading about it this week. He says he's changed the party. One of his team called it an albatross hanging around their neck. That might have been the Shadow Chancellor, maybe, Mr. Speaker. But he said they're doubling down on it. All this ahead of a crunch meeting, we're told this week, for them to work out how they're going to pay for it. I can save them some time because we all know the answer. Higher taxes for the British people.
Mr. Speaker, there's only one party that crashed the economy. They're sitting right there,
And Oh, Mr. Holmes, you've had your question already. Obviously, you don't want to remain for the rest of it. Here's Salma.
He has Mr. 25 tax rises, and he's got nothing to say on childcare. Millions of families will have been listening for an answer, and they got absolutely nothing. He announced that scheme a year ago, claiming it would get 60,000 parents back into work. Only on Monday of this week did he notice there was some, in his words, practical issues with that. 8 weeks before its launch, parents can't budget, plan for work or make arrangements with their employers. And the Prime Minister's response is to say, it's all fine, it's the fault of the Labour Party. Is this merely a practical issue, or is it yet another example of him simply not understanding how life works for other people?
Mr. Speaker, we're delivering the biggest ever expansion of childcare in this country's history, Mr. Speaker. But while millions of parents will benefit from that, again, it's right that he should come clean with them about the cost that his plans will impose on all of them. He goes on and on about the Green Promise, Mr. Speaker. He says he wants to keep it. But he doesn't have a plan to pay for it. What he's really saying is he'll scrap the borrowing associated, but he wants to keep the £28 billion of spending. So, for all those working families who are benefiting from our free childcare, he should come clean with them now. Why doesn't he come clean with them now? Come clean with them now and just be clear, his plans mean back to square one and higher taxes for British people.
Mr. Speaker, making steelworkers redundant and failing to provide childcare is not a plan, Prime Minister. It's a farce. It's a farce. And he may soon discover that with childcare, there's an IT problem. Nurseries haven't got the spaces. They haven't got the staff. There's a black hole in their budget, and it's 8 weeks to go. That isn't a plan. And families across the country, well, they can laugh all they like. Families are making plans now. They laugh at it, of course they do. Families are struggling with a cost of living crisis, trying to work out the household budget, balancing spiralling mortgages, prices and eye-watering bills. And then at the last minute, they're thrown into chaos because their nursery says they can't deliver the free childcare he promised. Now, he calls that a practical issue. but I preferred the honesty of whichever of his colleagues briefed to the Times that it was, and I quote, a complete shit show. Who was it who briefed that to the Times? Hands up. Will the Prime Minister finally realise...
I'll decide how long the question goes. Those who wish don't hear it, I've told you the answer, and I'll help you on the way. Keir Starmer.
When will the Prime Minister finally realise that the biggest practical issue facing Britain is the constant farcical incompetence of the government that he leads?
Mr. Speaker, another week with no ideas, absolutely no ideas as country, and absolutely no plan. He talked about the cost of living, Mr. Speaker, he talked about the economy, but he never actually brings it up, and we all know why, Mr. Speaker, because things are improving and we are making progress. Wages now rising, Mr. Speaker, debt on track to be reduced, and inflation more than halved from 11% to 4%, because he actually knows that our plan is working and that his £28 billion tax grab will take Britain back to square one. And that, Mr. Speaker, is the choice. It's back to square one and higher taxes with him, or a plan that's delivering a brighter future with the Conservatives.
Change of gear, Mr. Speaker. Too many oligarchs and kleptocrats are living off ill-gotten gains beyond the reach of domestic courts here or in countries like America. Ever since the 2016 London Anti-Corruption Summit, moves to create an international anti-corruption court have been gathering momentum to plug this gap. It already has support from countries like Canada, Holland and Nigeria, and would fund itself from the fines it charged. Will this government take the lead in getting it underway, ending impunity for these crooks once and for all?
Well, can I firstly pay tribute to my honourable friend for his work on this issue? As I'm sure he'll appreciate, establishing a new bespoke institution is a significant endeavour, but I know he's discussed it with the Foreign Secretary, who will look at the proposals in more detail. And in the meantime, as he knows, our Economic Crime Act has a raft of new measures to crack down on dirty money, and we will shortly be publishing our second anti-corruption strategy. Will set out ambitious plans for combating corruption, both here at home, but also internationally.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, last night, as Tory MPs were once again fighting amongst themselves, the public were sat at home watching John Irvine of ITV News report on footage from Gaza of an unarmed Palestinian man walking under a white flag, being shot and killed by the IDF. Prime Minister, such an act constitutes a war crime, does it not?
Mr. Speaker, we've been absolutely consistent that international humanitarian law should be respected and civilians should be protected. I've made that point expressly to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the Foreign Secretary is in the region this week making exactly the same point.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to rise to that dispatch box and tell the people of these Isles and elsewhere that shooting an unarmed man walking under a white flag is a war crime. Now, in recent weeks, this House has acted with urgency and intent following an ITV drama. The question is, will this House now show the same urgency and intent following this ITV news report? And finally, back a ceasefire in Gaza.
Mr. Speaker, no one wants to see this conflict go on for a moment longer than necessary, and we do want to see an immediate and sustained humanitarian pause to get more aid in and, crucially, the hostages out, helping create the conditions for a sustainable ceasefire. I set out the conditions for that earlier in the House. The Foreign Secretary is in the region today, and will continue to press all our allies and partners to make sure that we can bring about that outcome.
Tom Hunt.
Speaker, access to NHS dentistry is a key issue in Ipswich and Suffolk. Locally, actually, we've done something about it. And the University of Suffolk and the local NHS deserve great credit for establishing a new dental centre, which is going to carry 18,000 hours a year of NHS dental appointments. However, a source of great frustration for myself and a number of constituents is that many people who train to be a dentist at university for 5 years and have their training heavily subsidised can immediately go private or actually go abroad without giving anything back to the NHS. It seems wrong to me. Would the Prime Minister support the view of many of my constituents that for, say, 5 years they work in the NHS, they give something back, and this will make a huge contribution to this problem?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is a long-standing campaigner for better dental access in his constituency, and I congratulate him on the new dental centre that's opening, which I know he worked very hard to deliver. And I agree with him. It's right and fair that we seek better value for the significant investment that the taxpayer makes in the education and training of the dental workforce. That's why, as our workforce plan outlined, we are exploring whether a tie-in would ensure that dentists spend a better proportion of their time in the NHS, and we'll be launching a consultation on this policy later this year.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the week of the anniversary of Bloody Sunday, people in Derry are watching unarmed Palestinians being gunned down by Israeli soldiers. Over 25,000 people have now been slaughtered in Gaza. The Prime Minister says, and he said it again today, that he wants to see a sustained ceasefire. So my question is a very, very simple one. The next time there's a vote at the UN for a ceasefire, will his representative vote for it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course we'll engage with all UN resolutions on their merits, and I've been clear no one wants to see this conflict go on for a moment longer than is necessary. We do want to see an immediate pause so we can get aid in and hostages out, because the situation is desperate for many people there. But a sustainable, permanent ceasefire needs to fulfill a set of conditions, including Hamas releasing all of the hostages, Hamas no longer being in charge of Gaza with the threat of rocket attacks into Israel, and an agreement in place for the Palestinian Authority to return to Gaza to provide governance and services. The Foreign Secretaries in the region, those are the principles on which we are working, and I believe those are shared by all our major allies.
Sure.
In 1859, Brunel opened his rail bridge over the River Tamar. In 2022, I met with Network Rail and others to celebrate the agreement to build a simple footbridge going over the railway line in Lostwithiel. That bridge still doesn't exist, and I have no completion date. Can my right honourable friend help?
Well, I know that my honourable friend is a long-standing campaigner for the footbridge at Lostwithiel station, and I recognise her concerns and the pressing need for the construction of this footbridge. I'm told that Network Rail is currently working on a funding solution for this, so that it can take forward this important project in the next financial year, and the Rail Minister will keep my honourable friend updated on his progress.
Mr. West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A report released yesterday by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation found that 1 in 4 people in the North East are living in poverty, with the child poverty rate for every local authority in the region higher than the UK average. Too many of our people are being hard hit. Now, the Prime Minister says that his plan is beginning to work. So can I ask the Prime Minister, where does rising child poverty fit in his plan?
Well, in fact, Mr. Speaker, the plan is working because poverty is falling in our country. Since 2010, there are 1.7 million fewer people in poverty, including hundreds of thousands of children. Of course, there's more to do. There's always more to do to make sure children don't grow up in poverty, but that absolutely wouldn't be helped by Labour's £28 billion tax grab on their parents, which would take money out of their families' bank accounts.
James Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, Bracknell Forest is a place of aspiration, opportunity and enterprise. Business occupancy rates and employment figures are thankfully high. Footfall at the Lexicon Shopping Centre is up and wages are up, but the cost of living continues to bite across the UK. What more can be done to put more money in people's pockets?
Well, it's great to see, thanks to my honourable friend, that Bracknell Forest is thriving, with people in work up, footfall in the town centre up, and as he knows, almost 100% of his schools now good or outstanding. But he's right that we must do more to relieve the burden on working people, Mr. Speaker, which is why we cut taxes for tens of millions of people in work earlier this year, worth on average £450. And we've got to stick to the plan for lower taxes, a stronger economy, and a brighter future for the people of Bracknell Forest, and absolutely not risk going back to square one with the Labour Party.
Debbie Abrahams.
Mr. Speaker, if everyone had the same good health as the least deprived 10% of the population, in England there would have been a million fewer deaths between 2012 and 2019, and 28,000 fewer deaths in the first year of COVID. These inequalities are not inevitable. Does the Prime Minister think that cuts in social security to 85,000 low-income households, including people in low-paid work in my constituency, will help or to address these health inequalities?
Well, I can assure the Honourable Lady that we are committed to caring for society's most vulnerable, and that's why almost 20 million families will see their benefit payments increase this April, which will bring our total support over these few years to around £3,700 per UK household. The Department for Work and Pensions is looking very closely at how it can target its services precisely on the most vulnerable customers, and I know the Honourable Lady spoke to the DWP Permanent Secretary at length about this when he appeared before this Select Committee earlier this month, and I can assure her that he will be writing to the committee on exactly this subject shortly.
Jonathan Lord. The post office scandal has affected so many people, including my constituent, Seema Misra, a sub-postmaster from West Byfleet with an outstanding record of service to her community, who was wrongfully convicted in 2010 of stealing £75,000 and was sentenced to prison on her first son's birthday and whilst pregnant with her second son. Does the Prime Minister agree with me, and more importantly with Seema Misra herself, who is in the gallery today with her husband Devinder, that she is due a full apology from the Post Office, a full apology from Fujitsu, and proper compensation as a matter of urgency?
And I know my honourable friend has been a great support to his constituents over all the years and has fought relentlessly for the truth to come out. As I've said, the Horizon scandal is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history. We will introduce, as I said a few weeks ago, primary legislation within weeks to ensure that all convictions that were based on erroneous Horizon evidence are quashed, that will clear people's names, deliver justice and ensure swifter access to compensation. Innocent people, like my honourable friend's constituents, have waited far too long, and I'm determined that they receive compensation as swiftly as possible. We have a clear moral duty to right these wrongs, and that is exactly what we will do.
Alex Norris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2021, 3,527 food parcels were given out by Bulwell and Bestwood Food Bank. Last year, that number exploded to 6,500, with nearly half going to children. The food bank's now having to buy food to supplement donations, which can only be sustained for a short period. Rather than pretending that things are getting better, will the Prime Minister apologise for the daily chaos in government, which is leaving widespread destitution unaddressed?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to see anyone reliant on food banks, but while they're in place, I have nothing but praise and thanks for the people who run them. But it is wrong to say that we aren't making progress. When I came into this job, inflation was running at 11%. That is the single biggest impact on families' cost of living. And now, thanks to the efforts of this government, most of them opposed by his party, inflation has now been more than halved at 4%. And we're combining that with significant tax cuts to put more money in people's bank accounts at the end of every month. That's the right way to go about supporting people, combined with our extensive cost of living support for the most vulnerable. And all the statistics show that that support has helped, has made a difference, and that's what you get with responsible management of the British economy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In November, I held an adjournment debate on the South Fylde line and the need for a passing loop to double its hourly service and increase resilience against delays and cancellations, which again caused misery for travellers over Christmas. The assurances I received from the Rail Minister built on the positivity generated by the reallocation of HS2 funds. Since then, progress has been desperately slow, and my efforts to advance this critical piece of infrastructure for the people of Fylde has been frustrated. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss how the government can help to get the South Fylde line back on track?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is correct that local transport projects are and must be prioritised, and every region of our country will have more transport investment as a result of the decision that we made on HS2. Now, work is underway to consider potential upgrades to the West Coast Main Line, including improvements at Preston Station, which may support additional local services from South Fylde. I know the Rail Minister is carefully considering these options as we speak, and will update my honourable friend in due course.
Leila Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thames Water are a shambles. In the recent flooding in Oxfordshire, they were dumping sewage from 270 sites along the Thames in 1 week. There was waste backing up into people's homes because of drains that they had not unblocked, and they couldn't even refill their own reservoir because the rivers were too dirty. But rather than offer a rebate for this shoddy service, they are intending to put bills up for everyone by 60%. So will the Prime Minister explain to my constituents why they are being asked to foot the bill for Thames Water's gross incompetence?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've been clear that the volume of sewage discharged by water companies is unacceptable, and that's why we've launched the most ambitious storm overflow discharge reduction plan. And we have now achieved monitoring of almost every single storm overflow in England under this and previous governments, and have introduced unlimited penalties on water companies. And where there is evidence of poor performance, the Environment Agency will not hesitate to pursue water companies concerned, just as they did, I believe, a couple of years ago in the Honourable Lady's constituency, where they fined Thames Water specifically £4 million following a serious incident.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Honourable Member for Knowsley and I published our report on TIDE, type 1 diabetes and disordered eating, a condition estimated to affect over a quarter of type 1 diabetics in the UK. It is life-shortening, life-threatening, and can lead to death. I'm pleased to say that Hampshire Integrated Care Board have already responded positively to the report. Will my right honourable friend ensure that the government not only looks seriously at the recommendations we have put forward, but acts on those recommendations, which would improve lives, and save money for the NHS?
Can I start by thanking my right honourable friend and indeed the right honourable member for Knowsley for their important work on this issue. Of course, I know both of them speak from personal experience, and as she says, it is important that people get the treatment they need. The Health Secretary will, of course, consider the report, and the NHS has already been piloting services to support those with this condition, as she's aware of, and I understand that the NHS is also now expanding pilot sites to every region of the country so that even more people can benefit from the appropriate integrated care.
Adam Kaiser.
Mr. Speaker, we entered 2024 with starvation and famine as acute as ever across the globe, much of it caused by the climate crisis. Yet at present, the world's worst hunger crisis is in Gaza, created by Israel's ongoing siege. The Integrated Food Security Phase classification has found that of 600,000 people facing starvation globally, 95% of them are in Gaza. Mr. Speaker, starvation used as a weapon of war is a war crime. The Israeli government has the power to end this starvation crisis by ending the siege of Gaza and opening all crossings. Does it not, Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I've been absolutely clear that we are incredibly concerned about the devastating impact of the situation in Gaza on citizens. That's why we have tripled our humanitarian aid for this financial year to the region. And, as I said in the statement yesterday, are working with partners such as Jordan and the United States to open up new aid corridors so we can increase the supply of aid getting in to those who desperately need it.
Miriam Cates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, the press reported the tragic case of a 14-year-old girl who took her own life following horrific social media bullying, including on TikTok and Snapchat. Since 2010, across the English-speaking world, there's been a marked increase in poor teen mental health, teen suicide attempts, and children addicted to pornography. The United Kingdom has a strong tradition of legislating to protect children from serious threats to their safety and welfare. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's time to consider banning social media and perhaps even smartphones for under 16s?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the impact of what happens online on our children, and that's why our Online Safety Act tackles both criminal activity online and protects children from harmful or inappropriate content such as bullying or the promotion of self-harm, accessing pornography and also exposure to eating disorders. Ofcom are now rightly developing and consulting on the guidance and the codes of practices for how those platforms will meet their duties, and if they don't clean up their act, then Ofcom will be able to impose fines of up to 10% of global turnover on the social media firms.
Mr. Speaker, recently released documents reveal that the Foreign Office had serious concerns about Israel's compliance with international humanitarian law and its ongoing assault on Gaza. This assessment was hidden from Parliament, whilst the Prime Minister boldly stated his confidence in Israel's respect for international law. Since then, the scale of Israel's war crimes in Gaza have been revealed to the world thanks to South Africa's case to the ICJ. Therefore, is it now not the time for the Prime Minister to admit that he has the blood of thousands of innocent people on his hands, and for him to commit to demanding an immediate ceasefire and an ending of UK's arms trade with Israel?
Mr. Speaker, that's the face of the changed Labour Party.
Educational Trust exhibition in Portcullis House and for your personal unwavering commitment to Holocaust remembrance. Mr. Speaker, as we approach Holocaust Memorial Day, will the Prime Minister join me in commending the important work of the Holocaust Educational Trust, in particular their work with Holocaust survivors, who, despite living through the darkest moment in human history, continue to share their testimony in the hope of ensuring never again. In the face of the appalling rise in anti-Semitism which we see on the streets of Britain, will my right honourable friend join me in encouraging all members to sign the Book of Commitment and stand up against anti-Semitism?
Mr. Speaker, I join my honourable friend in paying tribute to the brilliant work of the Holocaust Educational Trust and thank her for all her work on this issue. I'll be signing the Book of Commitment this afternoon during my meeting with Lily Ebbett, and I encourage members on all sides to do the same and to reaffirm with shared determination to ensure that the Holocaust is never forgotten and to defeat the resurgence of anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred in our country.
Final question, Sarah Champion.
Mr. Speaker, I represent a proud steel community in Rotherham who stand with the steel workers in Port Talbot at this very worrying time. My constituents don't want to see their taxpayers' money used to make British workers redundant, our primary steel-making capacity decimated, and our national security compromised. So will the Prime Minister change his destructive course, starting by looking at the credible multi-union plan to safeguard our steel industry's long-term future?
Mr. Speaker, I know this is an anxious time for steel workers in South Wales, but we are committed to working with the steel sector to secure a positive and sustainable future. The Honourable Lady will know that during the pandemic we provided support to Celsa, a steel company in South Wales, to safeguard jobs and ensure the sustainability of that plant. And what was proposed to happen in South Wales was the loss of 8,000 direct jobs, thousands more across the supply chain, and the complete closure of the plant. Because of the government's investment and support and partnership with Tata, we have safeguarded 5,000 direct jobs, thousands more in the supply chain, and ensured the long-term sustainability of that steel plant so it has a brighter future. Obviously, this is difficult, but it's entirely churlish of her not to recognise the largest support package. It is one of the largest support packages that any government has provided any company, and in the process safeguarded thousands of jobs.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
That brings us to the end of this week's Prime Minister's questions. For this part of Politics Live, let's welcome our guest, John Glenn, for the Government, Cabinet Office Minister, Peter Kyle for the Labour Party, the Shadow Science and Technology Secretary, and Vicki Young, the BBC's Deputy Political Editor. Well, Rishi Sunak walked into the chamber against a backdrop of a former Cabinet Minister, a colleague of his, and his pretty damning intervention in the Telegraph today. We discussed it before, and so everybody was waiting to see if there would be further interventions during Prime Minister's questions, but apart from Keir Starmer talking about it, it didn't actually happen. But the leader of the Labour Party did say, I've changed my party. He is bullied by his, because Simon Clarke has called for a leadership election. Otherwise, the Conservatives will be massacred when that general election happens. But Rishi Sunak said Keir Starmer is not a leader. He is a human weather vane, flip-flopping on policies. Vicki, what did you make of it? I mean, I think it could have been worse, actually, for the Prime Minister. I mean, if you go into Prime Minister's questions and a former Cabinet Minister has just called your leadership uninspiring, accused you of having no policies, accused you of not understanding what the British people want and saying the party's being led to a massacre, obviously that is not ideal. I mean, what he's helped by is that there haven't, so far at least, been any more public calls for him to go. And I think, you know, Sir Simon Clarke, you know, he sounds angry and frustrated in that article, actually. I mean, he's no big fan of Rishi Sunak's, and he clearly just feels he had to speak out. But it doesn't feel like there's an organised plot, certainly not one that's particularly working or going well. And in fact, what's happened is that Rishi Sunak's had a lot of people coming out to support him. And I think he'll be probably slightly reassured by that. I mean, people like Lee Anderson, which is interesting, you know, the former vice chair of the party who lost his job last week because of the Rwanda bill, and he's come out and said our only chance to win the next election is by keeping Rishi Sunak in number 10. So, you know, I think in terms of actually bolstering the Prime Minister, you know, it might have helped a bit, unless, of course, it all changes, which, you know, it's possible but doesn't feel like it at the moment. Right, well, let's look at some of the substance of what Sir Simon Clarke actually said, John Glenn, because he said the Conservatives under Rishi Sunak are going to get massacred at the next election. The unvarnished truth, he says, is that Rishi Sunak is leading the Conservatives into an election where we will be massacred. And he goes on to say, we can see as part of his piece in The Telegraph, that he doesn't get what Britain needs and he's not listening to what the British people want. He's right in terms, if the polls are to be believed, he's right that the Tories will be massacred at the next election.
Look, there's one poll that matters, and that's on the general election. I mean, in the run-up to every election, there'll be lots of polls skewed in different ways with different criteria. I like Simon a lot. I work with him in the Treasury, but I disagree with him fundamentally. The Conservative Party is not going to have a leadership election. We are focused.
But should they? If they have been consistently 20 points behind Labour in the polls, you can see why he and others are worried. They're not calling for a leadership election, that's true, but they are worried about the polls.
Of course, we all, as politicians, look at opinion polls, but we've got to focus on what is actually really important to the British people. We've brought down inflation from 11 to 4%. We're seeing the recovery in the economy happening. We've made significant interventions to deal with the challenges that came out of COVID, and then we had to make good on that in terms of what happened following the Ukraine and inflation.
Right, I mean,
that's not something that can be just fixed in one moment.
It hasn't moved the polls, though, interestingly, but, Peter, there's no doubt that some of the economic indicators are now finally moving in the right direction.
You saw it all on display in PMQs here. Rishi Sunak is talking to his party, Keir Starmer is talking to the country. When all of the stuff that Vicki has just described is within the Conservative Party. It is the splits, the confrontation, the different directions, the pulling of different factions in different directions within the governing party, the Conservative Party. That is what the public is seeing from the outside. So people can say that, you know, all this stuff and it's all fine and I like him very much. The fact is that it's a party that's pulling in different directions. Keir Starmer, he has fundamentally fixed our party. The question is, when will Rishi Sunak pick a side and fix his party? Because if he doesn't, they are going to head in a direction that is going to take them to electoral defeat. What we want is the Conservative Party to actually stand up and say what they actually stand for these days, so we can have a battle of ideas. Right now, it's a battle with one party with ideas, one party with leadership, one party with policies, and a party which is fighting itself.
You know, the leader of the opposition may have 5 missions, but he's barely got 5 policies. People don't know what he stands for. He hasn't got a plan to fix, you know, really tough challenges that if you borrow 400 billion, you then see what happened in Ukraine. You see the amount of inflation. You need to get rid of inflation, so interest rates have to rise. You can't fix those problems overnight. But if you look at the investment that we've made in our police force, in our NHS, in actually dealing with the 5 priorities that he set out last year, we are delivering on that, and I think people recognise that the economy, which is core to an election success, is moving.
But why not call an election? Why not call the general election? I mean, you don't want a leadership election, but actually, as time goes by, there may be more Sir Simon Clarkes coming forward if the polls don't move. Why not go for the general election?
We know we're going to have an election this year. That's
but why not go for it in the spring?
Well, that's a matter for the Prime Minister.
I know that, but why wouldn't you be in favour of an earlier general election? Otherwise, the party could really fracture even further.
I've got important work to do in the Cabinet Office. I set out yesterday the speech I gave on how we're going to reform government, reform the civil service, get it to work more efficiently, get those numbers down, work on the cap that the Chancellor put in October.
Right, well, let's talk about one of those things. If it's an important speech, and I'm sure it was well received, what's happening with the childcare promise? Because that's not working very well, is it? I mean, we've got reports that your flagship childcare reform is under threat due to delays in allocating funding, staff shortages and issues with the IT system behind the scheme. I mean, if you can't organise that, how can you organise and reform the whole of government?
I think what the Prime Minister and the Chancellor set out last year was an enormous investment in the extension of childcare.
Is it going to happen?
Well, of course it's going to happen.
Is it?
And
in April?
There is massive amount of investment. What is clear is that there are some technical challenges. The Prime Minister's been clear about that. But the scale of what we're transforming here in terms of childcare provision for parents with younger children is enormous, and we are working day and night to deliver that.
Right. I mean, you would face the same issues and the same problems, potentially. I can't see what would change between now and the general election if you win it. But from April, I mean, it is quite a radical plan. The problem is, and it was actually thought about at the time, is whether it can be enacted. But you support broadly the free childcare for parents of 2-year-olds and under, and also then 5-year-olds. I think there's going to be working parents of children under 5 will be entitled to 30 years free childcare per week under the scheme. That won't be rolled out until 2025.
What we want is the government to deliver what it promised to, and it's showing itself incapable of it. We know there's also digital failure, as we're seeing right across government. I'm the Shadow Secretary of State that's preparing a programme of government that's going to include digital services, and we're learning from all of the very many, very costly mistakes that's happened there.
But why would it be different? Why would it be different under Labour?
Well, be higher taxes.
When it comes to, well, it certainly won't be higher taxes because you can't be.
What about the 28 billion?
We can't. Well, we have our fiscal rules, and whereas you've borrowed we borrowed more.
What about the 28
when
billion?
You've borrowed
be
more
clear with the British public.
When you, John, have borrowed more every single year of this government, national debt has gone up. When we left office, debt was 800 billion. Going into
when you left office, there was no money left.
When we went
on the desk of
when
I
we
was
went into COVID, it was 1.8 trillion because of you. After COVID, it's now 2.5 trillion, 4 times the state that we left it in. So we will not be lectured on debt from the party that blew a hole in our public finances.
The furlough scheme, I think, was a welcome intervention.
You backed the Truss mini budget. You were there on the benches cheering all the way. We have our fiscal rules. They are unbendable.
Well, let's talk about the fiscal.
They are unbendable. They will apply to everything, including all funding, including the Green Prosperity Fund on childcare.
No, we'll just pause there because you've gone on to fiscal. You've gone on to fiscal rules, both of you, and talked about the rules that you are committing yourselves to in terms of debt coming down at some point. I might add. I think people will wonder when you talked about borrowing £400 billion as a result of COVID. How could you ever, in the real world, really afford to offer people tax cuts?
Well, I think the truth is that because we took those tough decisions around public spending, we will be in a position where we will be seeing growth in the economy.
What growth?
We are seeing growth recover
in
the economy. Well, I'm not going to be able to predict it.
No.
Every fiscal event that I've been in the Treasury, I was in the Treasury for 5 years. Every fiscal event, the numbers move around. But on the 6th of March, the OBR will publish their assessment of what headroom exists, and the Chancellor will make decisions based on investing in
after 14 years of no growth. Why would anyone believe a word you say that you are going to deliver growth in the future? Well, you've had 14 years to change plan, to invest in our economy, to invest in our public services, to make sure we get the skills into our economy. You've chosen not to.
Let John respond.
Would they ever trust you to do something differently?
The thing that Peter needs to come to terms with is that being in government means taking tough decisions, and it means being clear with the British public about extra borrowing and extra taxes. And what we see with Labour is they don't have a plan. And when it comes to this 28 billion, when are we going to get some
the party that's delivered the highest taxes
are you going to raise taxes or not? Are you going to borrow more than we're borrowing?
Now, guys, you can't keep talking.
You are the last person that can ever lecture the Labour Party.
Peter, if you talk over each other, people can't quite follow. Interesting though it is. Let's talk about the 28 billion. Although before I do, John, when we're talking about tax cuts, you say that we've got this fiscal event on March the 6th. Jeremy Hunt's already pretty well saying there are going to be tax cuts. He's not waiting till March March the 6th. He's already saying, it's hinted, it's been reported widely, that he is looking seriously. Here it is, Jeremy Hunt in the Daily Telegraph hints at major tax cuts in spring budget. He's already doing that before we know what this so-called headroom is going to be, this so-called spare cash, which is a made-up number anyway.
Well, let me just say, look, we've already...
I'll come on to the 28 billion in a minute, but you answer that question.
Let me answer it.
Yeah.
We've reduced national insurance, so for the average family on household income of 35,000, they will see an extra £450. We did that just a few months ago.
Yeah.
And our inclination, our instincts is always to give back money to the British taxpayer when we can afford to do so, within the fiscal rules, and the OBR will assess that at the same time of the budget. So he hasn't committed to anything because, as I recall from my time in the Treasury, there will be an interaction between the Treasury and the OBR as the budget is prepared.
Except the budget watchdog, head of the OBR, is already saying UK spending plans worse than fiction. That's not a great way to go into your budget on March the 6th, is it?
But we also
know
know, from what I said at the Institute for Government yesterday, is that we can deliver things differently. If you look at the opportunity of AI to transform the way that we deliver government, it gives us an opportunity for 28 billion over the coming years to deliver services differently.
And what's the answer to the question posed by the OBR chairman, Richard Hughes, that your spending plans are worse than fiction?
Well, the OBR take a view on the numbers alone. What I'm interested in is actually challenging different departments in how to deliver those savings with the productivity plan that my successor, Laura Trott, will be bringing forward at the time of
Well, let's look at the £28 billion. John Glenn has referred to it a couple of times, because these are the plans that Labour has put at the sort of heart and centre, well, they did anyway, heart and centre of their plans for growth, for an industrial strategy. £28 billion a year of investment, a green investment plan, except, Peter, we have had so many people sit in this studio not able to completely commit to watering it down, to pushing it into the next Parliament if Labour wins the election. Can you once and for all commit and guarantee that that borrowing of £28 billion will happen come what may, or are the fiscal rules more important and it may not happen at all?
The fiscal rules are going to be the golden rules that will be adhered to at all times.
So they might not happen at all.
So we will not borrow irresponsibly, unlike the Tory party that has borrowed irresponsibly.
Yeah, we are.
No. So hang on, you've had a chance to talk about me.
Yeah, we have.
So I will just mention there is one party that turned off the OBR, that ignored all independent advice, and that's the Conservative Party that got us into this mess. So listen, Joe, we will have our fiscal rules, which means that we will lower national debt over the course of a Parliament. We will make sure that we are only spending for revenue spending for the government from tax revenue.
Right.
So we will have a balanced budget going through.
But just to be clear, and that's fine, and
Joe,
that's fine. I'm not criticising the principle, but what people might think, if it's so important, the green investment plan, and you really are committed to it, why not just put up taxes?
Redefine
why not put up
investment. That's what they'll do.
Well, no, hang on. So what you've said, let me just say two very brief things about it. Firstly, the Green Investment Pledge is not the only way of getting growth into the economy. The first thing we're going to do is review all planning applications so we can get data centres built, we can make sure we get growth, wind farms. Ukraine is building more wind farms than we are here in our country right now. That shows how bad the planning, the building, the infrastructure is in our country. There are lots of ways of getting growth. Secondly, we will move towards the Green Prosperity Plan, but this is about outcomes. It's not about a number. We will get to 100% green electricity by 2030. We will transition our economy so it's fit for the future. We will get the skills and generate the new jobs needed to get growth into the economy, meet our green pledges, and get development into parts of the country that is needed. If you look at the country in the world that's comparable, that has the highest growth, it's America. The country that's comparable, that has the lowest interest rate, it's America. We are learning from the experience of other countries, applying it here. They have no idea. They've got no plan, and they're not looking at anyone anywhere in the world where it's
Peter,
working.
Hold on.
Look where it's got us.
Reflect on the conversation, because it is interesting that we're already getting tax cuts sort of, dangled in front of us for March 6th. And this £28 billion, I mean, there are other ways of getting growth, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, I think the 28 billion, I think we can go back to last June, and that was when actually many Labour figures started almost rowing back from it. So I think this has been going on a very long time, and we'll just have to see how far they go with suggesting it might not happen at all. I think on the tax cuts, look, Rishi Sunak, and this feeds into what Simon Clarke was saying, he needs something to move the dial, or whatever the word you want to use. Now, people will see that potentially as a pre-election bribe. They might not care, but they might then look at all the taxes that have gone up over the last few years. And then I think the other thing, talking about going back to the childcare issue there, I think the danger for the government, and not all of it is their fault, you look at the post office, for example, that people start to think nothing's working. Nothing's working, everything's going wrong, there's another IT glitch with childcare, you promised this, I now can't get it, there aren't enough people working in nurseries and childcare, and that is a very difficult thing once a party gets to that stage to turn around, and I think that frustration is what you can sort of sense in what Simon Clarke is saying.
Well, let's carry on in that vein, Vicki, because we've got this news headline. We've talked a lot this week about cash-strapped councils and the tough choices that they are facing. A number of them have gone effectively bankrupt. And there has been a settlement that was announced in December, but they want more money. They need more money, they say, against what we've just been talking about, prospect of tax cuts or £28 billion of borrowing.
Well, and again, it could be council tax bills that go up, so that's taxes going up again, isn't it? So, people can see that the services are not as good as they were, and yet they're paying more money. Now, again, are they going to blame their council? Are they going to blame central government? I think there is an announcement which may or may not have happened today about more funding.
It is. We're expecting it today.
But I don't think it's expected to be anywhere near enough to make up for those.
Well, the councils, John Gled, say in England, say they need an extra £750 million. This is on top of the £64 billion. Will they get it?
Well, look, it's a matter for the Chief Secretary and the Chancellor. All I know is that every government department always asks for more money. I mean, there is a process by which those asks are interrogated. We have put additional money for social care into local councils and a significant uplift at the last fiscal event. But there'll always be that tension. But the instincts of the Conservative Party, and as we've shown with the National Insurance cut very recently, is that we're very aware that it's taxpayers' money. And therefore, we need to spend it wisely, and we need to give as much back to the taxpayer as possible.
But there are Tory councils that are also struggling.
Yes, of course.
And there are Tory councils that are going bust or on the brink of going bust.
But there are also very well-run ones, like Wiltshire Council, where they do things differently and plan for the long term. So there is a range of experiences across the local government.
But you are actually operating against a backdrop of rebellion, potentially, on this issue from Conservative MPs. We had Ben Bradley here, who's the Mansfield MP. He's also the leader of Nottinghamshire County Council. Another Conservative MP for Shrewsbury, Daniel Kaczynski, says colleagues should rebel against the government over this issue until they get the money they need to run their services. What do you say to both those MPs?
What I say is that Michael Gove will be working very hard with them to understand their concerns and to come up with effective solutions. But, there's always going to be a balance. That's some of the tough decisions of government will have to balance those competing demands.
Yes, they will.
I recognise the seriousness of their concerns, and they need to be interrogated by Michael Gove.
And again, it's choices. Tax cuts or money going to councils or to public services. I mean, the public polling broadly says they would like any spare cash, what you call fiscal headroom, if there is cash around to do that, to go into public services. Would you agree?
The problem with this conversation is always the problem I have in every single conversation I have when I'm interviewed on this show, and that is you've got a problem in schools. How are you going to fund it? Problem caused, crumbling buildings. At the moment, every primary school, every secondary school is in deficit because of the capital underspend.
Because you may win the next election.
Now we look at local authorities. Then we look at solving the waiting list crisis with 7.73 million people waiting for treatment. What you see with this government is shoveling money after failure. What we need to do is get to a state where we're actually investing for the future. That is where we need to get to. So when the A&Es get into crisis in the middle of winter, you shovel money in to get them through the winter. When you have a council that's about to go bust, shovel money in it to get it through the crisis.
So no more money for public services. They don't need it.
No, we will start to get to a point where we can start invest. So we will move from an analogue to a digital age in the NHS. We will go from crisis to prevention. We did it before when we ended in 2010 when we handed over to the Conservatives.
When you say investing,
we had no waiting lists. And we had the highest.
The economy was in a more benign state for whatever reason. For whatever reason. And yes, there was the financial crash, the war in Ukraine and pandemic and so on and so forth. But what do you mean when you say investing? You're investing. It means money, doesn't it?
No, it means the way you manage. So at the moment, if you're constantly waiting for things to fail and then shovel money into it, where you actually have a functioning system. So, for example, we're going to cancel the non-dom tax status and we're going to set the Fit for the Future fund up. So we can make sure that we create we're going to double the number of diagnostic equipment so that we can end some of the
green investment you talked about, the 28 billion, was about growth, wasn't it?
Some of it.
So if you're not going to do that, then where's your growth going to come from?
Some of it was, but also planning reforms, also other structural reforms that we'll bring in. I mean, this government Michael Gove has introduced 3 bills on planning reform. All 3 of them have fallen before they've got to the end of the legislative process. This is a government that cannot get anything through its own backbenches. It wasn't opposed by us, or it wasn't we didn't bring it down. It was the Conservative MPs that brought those 3 planning bills down. Unless we can sort the structural problems out our country faces, we will never move from crisis to actually planning for the future.
All right, well, let's do that then, John Glenn. In terms of those choices and priorities, and I mean, Vicki points out that people perhaps think you can't run anything because nothing seems to work. And that's a difficult impression to move away from, whether it's true or not. Is it really the case that tax cuts are the most appropriate thing to do with any spare money around, rather than putting it into public services?
Well, I think most hard-pressed families at the moment, coming out of the cost of living crisis, will be very aware of the amount of tax they have been paying, which is plenty high.
Under a Conservative government.
Yes, well, because of the amount of money we had to spend through COVID. If you paid people's wages during the furlough scheme, then you have to get the money from somewhere. It was clearly unexpected, and then you have to pay it back.
There were a lot of problems before COVID.
Where the cost of interest increases massively, you've then got to deal with that. So, these aren't simple solutions available. There aren't simple solutions available. What's clear to me is that Labour don't have a plan. We are ready to do what's necessary for the...
All right, well, I'm afraid the plan here is we're at the end of the programme. From all of us here, bye-bye.